And let's go back to the question of legislation. So tell us a little bit how the law is created and by the parliament now. Yeah, if you could, and maybe some important elements in this process.
Yeah, so the first part of the process is it starts actually before the introduction of a bill. We have two papers, the white paper and the green paper, before we get to the bill stage, which are effectively just proposals for the bill, which is later intended to become legislation, to become an act of parliament. What's interesting is you can see this process online on Parliament's website. You can follow a bill all the way through Parliament. They'll tell you what stage it's at, which house it is in. If we look at the debate stage in this flowchart, once it gets to the bill stage, it effectively bounces sometimes between both houses. It's heard in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords, and amendments potentially made by both before we get to the final bill that is put forward for royal assent. There are a few limited circumstances in which actually a bill did not go before both houses. I think the Hunting Act in 2004 that had some implications for fox hunting was not something that was put before the House of Lords. There's very limited exceptions to avoiding the House of Lords in this process. But initially we have the green and white paper, then we have a bill. The bill is heard by both houses. They debate over the bill and make amendments. Then the final stage is royal assent, where the monarch effectively signs off on the bill itself before it becomes an act of parliament.
Great, thank you. What I also noticed, many of the acts of parliament which were adopted centuries ago are still in force in the UK. How do you cope with that? I still remember the Law of Property Act from 1925. It was just a nightmare to read.
We still have some of our old pieces of legislation, like the 1890 Partnership Act as well, as unfortunately still current law. What tends to happen, though, as we get further on is that we do impliedly repeal some of our older laws by introducing new laws or making new decisions. Sometimes we do it expressly as well. If we want to move forward and say that, you know, a previous act is no longer good law, we would specifically say in a new piece of legislation that another older piece has been repealed, so that we don't end up with something that is old and archaic and no longer applicable to what we're doing now.
So what is the role of judiciary in case if we have some issues with the language because it's very archaic or, you know, not very specific?
The judiciary plays a big role in this in terms of their interpretation. They can help by interpreting some fairly old, archaic language, but in a modern context. There will obviously be things now in the present day that were not necessarily considered at the time that legislation was created, especially if it's an old piece of legislation. Like, for example, we have criminal offences, many still under the Offences Against the Person Act, which is a 19th century piece of legislation. We need to help that evolve through judicial creativity and the way that judges actually interpret the terms that are used in those older pieces of legislation.